My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing. Here's Numbness, by VeikingOfficial. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. But this smile is a mask, as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel numbed by your past, by your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. Good work. This is Numbness by VeikingOfficial. Definitely a poem I relate to. Maybe a poem lots of people here relate to. Short, simple, perhaps. Definitely relatable. And I do like your sort of verse. It's interesting because the verse has this sort of lightness to it. By your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. Like, I always find verse to have this sort of movement and this lightness, and yet it's contrasted with that numbness. It almost feels maybe like a part of that mask, right? Putting that happy structure, that structure of motion, emotion, on top of numbness, right? But I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to read it again. Numbness by VeikingOfficial. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. But this smile is a mask, as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel numbed by your past, by your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. I almost find this, I really like this little last couplet here. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. It has so much like bounce and life to it. It almost feels, I would say, like Seussian, Dr. Seuss, right? But of course the contrast is that while it almost structurally, stylistically feels like that, you have this very heavy topic underneath it, where you're not talking about one fish and two fish and loraxes and truffle trees or whatever. You're talking about depression, numbness, right? And that's I think it evokes such a powerful like mixed feeling here, which I do really enjoy that. But it's funny. Maybe it's not funny. Maybe it's just real. It's sobering how often I say this word on stream when I'm reading people's poems. If I return to I sit alone, dullness. I feel like I wrote numbness somewhere on this poem, right? Like literally yesterday. Not yesterday, a few days ago. We were talking about living in a gray room and the dull buzz and the numbness. I definitely said it out loud at least. And then, like, so many things where you have these ideas of a life that is numb. And it's hard because, like, you know, we write about suffering and it's fairly clear that lots of people are suffering with these same things, right? Hi, Jenny. Hi, everyone. How are we all today? I'm doing pretty well. Currently reading Numbness by VeikingOfficial. And just... We read a few poems already, and it was nice and chill. And we're reading more poems. And life is a little hard, admittedly, right now for me, for a lot of us. But we carry on, right? We carry on. This smile is a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel numb. And so, using words like always, right, is a very powerful thing. You know, I tend to be fairly afraid to use words like always in my work because to me words like this almost feel like promises. You know, always is a long time, or always refers to a whole lot of existence, right? To that feeling of happiness, you always feel numb. And it's not to say that I don't agree with this, because this is absolutely how it actually does feel during these states of numbness. I have been numb just like this. Oh, yep, I'm a bit in denial about it all. Glad to see you're keeping your chin up despite it all. I'm keeping my chin up when I have to. I'll tell you that. I cried on stream yesterday. Numbed by your past, by your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. And if we're just talking about like things I relate to, it is so difficult to exist in this headspace, in a mind that's not clear, in a mind that is out of one's control, right? Because the world is already like pretty messed up a lot of the time, and there's a lot of things against us, right? And like oftentimes life kind of sucks, and like the temperatures are going up, and like the sea levels are going up, and the bank accounts are going down, and like the amount of rights are sometimes in jeopardy, and life is hard, and there aren't great answers, and unfortunately, you know, you would hope maybe that when life is so tumultuous and everything is hard, that at least you have like your own mind to fall back on. And in a lot of cases, that's not the reality. Of course, that's something that can change, but this poem is not about change, because that is not a reality here for this like speaker in this poem, right? It's just a wish. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. And so I said that echoed like Seuss. It feels so Seussian in its lightness. But of course, we have a topic that is so absolutely opposed to the feeling that like the structure evokes. Not to be disrespectful, but Renaissance art is just Bible fan art. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, admittedly, it's sort of historical as well, right? Yeah, fan art is great. There is also a degree of like historicism there. Of course, it's not historical that everyone is sitting on the same side of the table. It doesn't make sense. For me, I came to a point where it's not what excites me that's driving me forward, but only things that barely keep me from stopping that keep me going. Yeah. And these are definitely like places to be. Places where we are sometimes, often, sometimes, always. And it's hard. And I do want to talk about like structure here and verse. Because I do think the structure you used lends itself. So structures can have emotion baked into them. I think this is like important to recognize as poets. You know, sonnets, some of you might already be saying, are love poems, generally, right? There is a sort of lightness in iambic pentameter. There is also, like, at this point, a sort of archaic feeling to the sonnet if you write it now, right? You have things like, I don't know, odes, which are, you know, different from that, and you have epics, which are usually using some form, you know, heroic verse, whatever, not important, right? Blank verse. And then there's also more modern things, and I don't know what it's called, the kind of style that, like, Seuss uses, but, you know, I think whatever it is that, like, this line, you wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be, you know? There's this repetition in there, there's this bounciness, this verse, this rhyme, that is, it gives this feeling that it is so light, it is so, like, joyous, and then there's, like, almost like a childhood, maybe, like, nostalgia kind of vibe to it, right? And when we choose structures that do not do the things that our poem does, it has an effect on our poem. And of course, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. I think here it's like extremely effective because you write literally about this mask, right? That's what the mask is. Sorry. The smile of the boy, full of love and full of joy. That is fundamentally a mask of clay that is showing life showing beauty, showing lightness to the world, right? And yet, which is exactly what the structure does, right? So, in a sense, the structure itself in your poem really feels like it is connected directly with this idea of being part of the mask, right? Oh god, now I have that stuck in my head. Yeah, now every time I say mask, I'm like cringing inside. I don't even know how the song goes anymore, which is great. I didn't listen to it that much, but it's whatever. So, yeah, the structure really like helps you do this cool thing in your poem, which is like really awesome. Also, Viking Official, I didn't ask all the questions at the start. Now that I've talked a little bit about like analysis and what's happening here, and we'll talk more, are you okay with some critique? Are you okay with critique from chat potentially? Are you okay with this going on the YouTube playlist? And is there anything you want me to look at, especially now that you've heard a little bit of my ideas on this? Yes, sure, down for it. Okay. And I was supposed to put a thing in chat saying that we were reading Numbness by VeikingOfficial and pin it. Whatever. Nah, just go with the flow as you want to. Okay. I'm going to throw in chat for anyone who comes in. We are currently reading Numbness by VeikingOfficial. No trigger warnings. Awesome. I don't feel like there's any. Put that there. I'll pin it. Boom. Easy. Okay. Dude, my lips are so chapped. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. So, I think this is cool. The space here, right? Spaces mean things. And you put this space so very intentionally and so very obvious at the start. And this is, of course, the only part that is actually talking about, like, the way that you portray joy. Otherwise, it's just like sad, 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 right? And so the gap here, right? So full of love, so full of joy. But of course, we have this, like, just space. This, perhaps, empty space, or a feeling of emptiness, right in the middle of our feeling of love and joy, which I think, sometimes we do really cool things to, or poets will do really cool things to express an idea, an actual, like, if it's empty in the middle, there's something lacking about this. And of course, then we go on to elaborate, which is very cool. Just to share some trans joy, I have a date with a fellow trans woman next week, probably to a game console museum. That's cool, because sometimes the stereotypes are true. That's awesome, Stylish Fail. I'm excited for you. You'll have to tell us about it. It's very fun. So, we have this emptiness inside of the smile, inside of every smile, inside of every feeling of joy that is very succinctly but here. Also, to go back to the idea of the sort of Seussian rhymingness, just the way that you call it, the smile of a boy, that does give a feeling of, like, youth, this idea that, the childish joy that is depicted not only in the form, in the structure, but then also you double down by saying that there is an innocence, or a youthfulness in the smile that is false. So I think that's like really, really beautifully done in the first couplet. So I think you should be really proud of like some of the moves that you made here and throughout the poem. But this smile is a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall behind you and the person you portray. This couplet, I mean, admittedly, to me, I think clarifying that the mask is constructed of clay, as if constructed of clay, maybe does help trying to decide if I like this. And I think I do. Because it gives this true feeling of like physicality, tactility to the mask. Where it's like, this is an actual thing that weighs on me, and that, even though it is a smile, it has this weight, and it does cover other things, right? A thin wall between you and the person you portray. The use of you here is really interesting. And I personally try not to write like this. So this, right, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. Sometimes we use you referring to like people as a whole, and then kind of also referring to ourselves. Sometimes we use you to just like straight up refer to someone else. But like regardless, I feel like, so I tend to interpret you as talking about someone else in a poem. Because if we're talking about ourselves, and this doesn't have to be the poet talking about themselves, but the speaker of the poem, the boy, right? If we want to have the boy speaking, then I think personally we ought to use I here. But me, right? Thin wall between me and the person I portray. And this can feel very difficult to write as a poet, even if you're expressing something that's honest feeling of you, which this may or may not be. But regardless, I think it gives a feeling of like closeness, of personability to the speaker of the poem that we write. And this is a distinction that I'm trying to get better at, like ensuring I always express, but it's the difference between the poet and, use a different color, the poet and the speaker, or sometimes like the subject of the poem, right? I think subject is maybe a good way to put it. And as we write a poem, I think no matter what, not no matter what, but I think a better approach to analysis, at least when you're not as familiar with a poet, is to not assume that the poet is the one talking. I tend to assume that the poet has written a separate speaker who is talking about a subject. And this is just because I don't know if these feelings reflect back on the poet. They tend to, because we write ourselves onto the page. But I tend to only talk about the poet and their actual writing if I am extremely familiar with either the person or their work. Let's take Bukowski. He writes in first person always. Not always, almost always, right? Whenever there's something. And he writes about events from his life. We know he talks about it. I've listened to him a lot. And they are very, like, anecdotal from his life. He describes himself. And just, like, we know from reading lots of Bukowski, we know from listening to Bukowski talk, that Bukowski's poems are very often, if they say I, they are, like, strictly autobiographical. But that's not the case for every poet. And to sort of protect the poet and oneself doing analysis, I think it is very important to, if you are unsure, assume that it is a speaker, right? So we'll do this if we are sort of unsure. And this is why my advice to, like, a poet is, when you use a word like you versus me, right? I tend to assume that this you isn't actually saying me. Because, like, linguistically, sometimes we just do this, right? You know, or we say you to talk about more of, like, a we. It's weird, you know. Sometimes you wake up and you go eat breakfast, and you go eat breakfast and it tastes really good, and then you feel good about your day, and then you go live on Twitch and stream, let's say. It's talking about, like, a general you, which isn't a person, which isn't the self, but it's usually informed by one's own personal experience. So admittedly, I tend to not like this word, unless, so personally, right? But this could, of course, you know, I like it when it's very clear that it is talking to either the reader, or it is sort of a dialogue talking to another person. And maybe I do like it, because I tend to convince myself to like things. Short edit. I think this comes from me not being a native speaker. In German, the you is solely referring to the reader, since it can't mean multiple people. Okay. Yeah. So cool. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy so full of love, so full of joy. But the smile is a mask of as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel young. Or feel numb. Numb by your past, your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. And I guess I do want to talk about a few different interpretations of this you, but first I'm going to take a little break. I just wrote interpretations, because I do think there are a few ways to read this, right? And I want to show them. even though I sort of now know what you're saying with this you, I do want to show how it can be different, right? See can be though, right? Do can't. I presume those are German words. I'm going to run a short little ad break. It's kind of a long ad break, but I'm going to take care of myself and drink water. Please don't watch it. Ads are bad for your brain. Shark. I'm going to check my Discord. Kind of thought my girlfriend was coming over today, but she might not be awake. I don't know. I give up. Okay. Welcome back. My name is Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus, still on the internet. Y'all are still talking about German, and I don't know German, so I can't much help with that discussion. But let's talk about you in this poem. Right? So there are a few things that this you can do. And I want to show why I don't always like you that much if it's not specified. Sure? So I think you here can talk to the reader. And this can perhaps maybe conjure some amount of like empathy to a reader who doesn't really understand, right? So perhaps it's saying, this is what it is like if you were to feel this. That is how I would take this, as if it were talking to the reader. And that's kind of neat. When everyone sees the smile of a boy so full of love, so full of joy. But this is a smile. But this smile is a mask, as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. I do just find this strange, because if it's talking to the audience, it very much like projects that upon them, which maybe is okay. But to say like,
between you and the person you portray, when like the audience doesn't necessarily do this. Like, yes, it can sort of be like, I don't know, sort of informative. It's just interesting. Now, what everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. What everyone sees, right? But then there's what I see. I is in the subject of the poem, seeing the boy. So you could be the boy. This is a different way to see it. But the smile is a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray, right? So it could be saying, I'm talking to you, the boy. I see that other people see a smile of a boy, and here's what I see. I see you, the boy, clinging on, feeling of happiness. You always feel numb by your past, all these things you wish, right? And in a sense, that sort of could also be the reader, if it is a poem like to the boy, right? Almost like dialogue or like a letter, right? That's a way to do the you. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. But this smile is a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. Now, we had the sort of idea of like informing the reader, but it could also, and I'm just showing this for demonstration, even though you already clarified, you can mean me here, right? It can. Me as in like the speaker. But this smile's a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. And that's just sort of using the more like colloquial, like conversational, like linguistic pattern that we do of talking about it. If I say like my head really hurts, and I said it'd be like if you drove a railroad spike through your eye. You know, that's what my headache feels like. That's what you would feel, right? Where really it is kind of me talking about what I feel, but I'm using you to sort of demonstrate or create some of that like empathy, right? So, and it's not bad, right? It's not bad at all that it uses you. It's just that it leads to many interpretations. And there are probably ways to clarify it. For example, if you the Phineas Gage special, I don't know what that refers to. If you wanted to make sure it's referring to the boy, what everyone sees is the smile of a boy, you so full of love, or so full of love, you so full of joy. That tells us, that gives us a cue that throughout the poem, you is the boy, and it's a poem talking to the boy. Easy. And whether the boy is like the intended reader, or just a boy within the sort of subject-object underneath the poet, it doesn't really matter, right? That would be like a way to clarify that. And if it was trying to kind of reflect back on me, the subject, right, then I think it would make more sense. But this smile is a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between me and the person I portray, which is like the most direct, emotional, like this is what I'm feeling, the subject of the poem. Again, not necessarily the poet, but it also tends to be associated more with the poet if you write in first person. So those are like the two things. You could use we, but this smile's a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between us and the people we portray, which then speaks to a broader thing and says everybody does this, right? But of course, I don't think I like that because we're talking specifically about the boy, right? We've indicated some amount of like singularity, singular subject. So we probably don't want to use that because that would add confusion. But there's so many different pronouns you can use here to talk about like who you're talking about. And you could use they. Again, that might be more obviously referring to the boy or a boy because we already refer to them not directly. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. But this smile's a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between them and the person they portray. That, like, eliminates the the you confusion of you being me, the subject, and shows that we're talking about, like, the boy. Of course, if we like the you as talking directly to, like, an intended reader, then we just include the word you somewhere in this first couplet, and then I think it sort of rectifies things. But I'm not necessarily, I guess, picking at the language to make any sort of suggestions or critique, just showing maybe as an informative tool through your poem, so thank you, how important the use of like a pronoun can be, right? Which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to look at this. Like, what if I changed this word throughout the poem and see how it would act differently? So it is kind of neat. No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel numb. Numbed by your past, by your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. Your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. You wish that for once, just for once you could be, free from this burden, free as can be. Maybe a point of critique with like the verse. So, you wish that for once, just for once you could be free from this burden, free as can be. I think there's maybe a little hiccup in flow here. Like, you have to intentionally add a pause. You wish that for once, just for once you could be free from this burden, free as can be. Right. Where if you added a few more syllables, you wouldn't have to have that pause. Because if I don't pause there, you wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. There's a little stumble there. It is intentional. And I also do notice there's a parallel nature in the first couplet and the last one, where what everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, less, so full of joy. It's like incomplete down here. And then you do connect it back at the end. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be, which does create like a nice structure. Admittedly, I like the parallel thing here, and maybe that was the intentional part, maybe that wasn't, but regardless, like, it is nice. But the smile's a mask that was constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. This might be the verse that I actually have like critique on, because this one's like longer. But this smile's a mask as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person portrayed. Right? It feels like the person you portray just makes it like one too many syllables. And then it would make these more consistent throughout, and then maybe it would make this feel more intentional. Because sometimes like this verse being a little longer and giving a little hiccup in the thing, in the reading, can make other later things that are sort of intentional hiccups feel less intentional, right? Just because there are like more of them. It's weird, right? No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel numb. Numbed by your past, by your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear, right? All of that flows pretty well. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. And then I think, like, when all of this flows as smoothly as possible, it does make this feel more satisfying when it is like not smooth, especially as a sort of last line, right? So it's like literally one syllable here that makes that feel better to me. But like, again, critique your choice whether to take it. You found the submit command. Good job, High Caliber. It's almost like the command to submit is submit, and it's also in the title of the stream. I'm playing. You're fine. So, do you have any questions, Viking Official? And does anyone in chat have their own thoughts on this poem? Does anyone vehemently hate this poetry? Does anyone kind of not like it? Does anyone really like it? Does anyone love it? Does anyone have things they would improve, do different? Thoughts, questions? I'm all ears. You as well, Viking Official, if you have any questions. No comments so far? Beautiful, beautiful. I find the mask analogy a little overdone. That is true. It is like a very common analogy. And like I won't lie there. It is definitely very common to talk about like putting up a mask for your emotions, which in a sense makes this poem not necessarily do anything new in that sort of object within the poem, that metaphor. So yes, and even like clay, that's nothing like new for the mask. But I do think the poem does kind of make up for that in the juxtaposition of the verse and the, like I said, kind of Dr. Seuss feeling. Like, I think the fact that the poem is simple, and even that the metaphor is simple, and all of this, allows some of the structural choices to stand out. And I don't know how this poem would feel with, like a different metaphor, right? Usually tend to write about my own situation in my poetry. Since last year, everyone was shocked by my attempts, and told me no one expected it, so I was at a smile, use the mask. Yeah, and I mean, fundamentally, the best analogy, the best metaphor, the best language you can use is the one that relates most to you. And it's the one that resonates the most with you. And if it does, I mean, like, I'm sure you know, I'm sure you've seen the mask analogy. Like, it's no secret. No one's hiding the mask analogy. It's used a lot. But I do think that to that point, it is useful. Not useful. There's nothing wrong, with something that's been used a lot. So long as you do something different with it. I think maybe you could lean more into like some structural differences. Like I think what you do at the start here, I think even at the end with like the hiccup in the verse, I think the sort of, just the nature of the verse makes this poem really nice. Cute Nico. Hey Jin, who's next on the list? It's probably, I think it's my bestie. My bestie being Antenna Pen. I never read poetry if I'm honest. I only tend to write, so I didn't even know it's used often. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why it's okay to like use something that some people think is overdone, because to approach something that is like generally considered overdone, the mask, is like some people would hesitate to write a poem about the mask just because of like the perceived overdonedness of the mask, but a sort of being able to look at it from a fresh perspective is always valuable. So I do think like I don't think something being done a lot makes it less valuable. I do think it makes it harder to stand out. Like I don't think this poem stands out next to, you know, other descriptions of mental illness and masking. I mean, we literally talk about masking that like is a coping mechanism, right? So usually that's usually in reference to like autism spectrum, but still, right? But using something that is often done in your work, you know, writing a poem about masks, writing a poem about, you know, certain flowers and their colors, writing poems about whatever, right? It's not an issue, I guess. But you know, that's a reasonable thing to bring up because like, yeah, if I wrote a poem about a mask, I would probably look at it and be like, man, everyone writes about masks. But that doesn't make it a worse poem. That's like a good thing to remember, right? Any other comments about the poem? Thoughts from friends? Questions? Ideas and interpretations? Glorious outputs of praise and love, virulent hatred. I hope no one's hating over poems, but if it's there, express it, right? No. I don't know if I have a ton more to say. I don't even know when I started talking about this, but yeah, I do like it. I mean, I feel that like I'm allowed to say I like the poem at the end because I've gone through for an hour and talked about different things that I do find effective, and then at the end I can be like, okay, I like this poem. So, but I always hesitate to say at the end like, yeah, I like this poem because that's the most fundamentally hollow praise in the art world, is just to say like, I like your work. But I guess I've also shown that I like your work, right? I don't know. It's hard. Am I allowed to say that, guys? Am I just allowed to say I like things at the end? I think so. I'm allowing it. It's my stream. I'm the DM. That's what the mask is. Should I read this again? I should read this again. I think we're done. Numbness by VeikingOfficial. Thank you so much for submitting. What everyone sees is the smile of a boy, so full of love, so full of joy. But this smile is a mask, as if constructed of clay, a thin wall between you and the person you portray. No matter how hard you try to cling on to that feeling of happiness, you always feel numb. Numbed by your past, by your trauma and fear, your vision obstructed by a mind that's not clear. You wish that for once, just for once, you could be free from this burden, free as can be. Numbness by VeikingOfficial. Thank you so much for submitting your work. I appreciate reading y'all's work. Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.